A street girl's desperate warning to a millionaire in a bustling restaurant sets off a chain of events that will forever change their lives. Before we start, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Ellie hunched beneath the awning of a bakery that had long since closed for the night, her knees pulled to her chest as a frigid wind swept through the streets of New York. The aroma of roasting garlic and fresh bread wafted from the upscale restaurant across the street, taunting her empty stomach. Clad in a threadbare hoodie and jeans, Ellie shifted to stay warm, eyeing the trash cans near the restaurant's alley. Her hunger overcame her reluctance to trespass. Quietly, she crept to the back of the restaurant, hoping to find leftovers that could stave off the gnawing ache in her stomach. As she neared the alley, raised voices halted her in her tracks. "You're sure it'll work?" a man's gruff voice demanded. Madeline Lawson, her voice low but venomous, replied, "He'll eat it, Greg. He never questions me. By the time the paramedics get there, it'll be too late." Ellie froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she crouched in the shadows, barely daring to breathe. The weight of their words sank in, chilling her more than the icy wind. Who were they talking about? And what did Madeline mean by, "it'll be too late"? Madeline stepped into the glow of a streetlight, her sleek black dress glittering under the dim light. The man beside her, tall and broad-shouldered, shifted uneasily. "You're playing a dangerous game, Madeline," he muttered. "I'm playing to win," she snapped. "And once Charles is gone, I'll have everything." Ellie pressed a hand to her mouth, horrified. Whoever this Charles was, he was in grave danger. The couple exchanged a few more words before retreating into the restaurant. Ellie lingered in the alley, trembling as she pieced together what she'd overheard. Poison. Murder. Charles. Her first instinct was to walk away. This wasn't her world. People like Madeline Lawson and Charles lived in skyscrapers, surrounded by wealth and security, far from the cold reality of street life. Who would believe her anyway? She was nobody. But as she turned to leave, an image of Charles flashed in her mind. A man laughing, toasting with friends, unaware that his life might end tonight. Ellie clenched her fists, determination swelling in her chest. She couldn't ignore what she knew. She had to act. Ellie slipped through the side door of the restaurant, her heart pounding. The dining hall was dazzling, the chandeliers casting golden light over pristine white tablecloths and polished silverware. Waiters moved in synchronized precision, attending to guests who exuded wealth and indifference. Ellie felt painfully out of place, her patched clothes and matted hair drawing disapproving glances. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on a man at a corner table, Charles Lawson. He was dressed sharply, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed. A glass of red wine rested in his hand as he laughed with two companions. His plate was being placed before him by a waiter, its contents meticulously arranged like a work of art. Ellie's pulse quickened as she moved closer. A waiter intercepted her, blocking her path. "Excuse me, miss, you can't be here," he said curtly. Ellie craned her neck to see Charles, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to him. It's important. His life is in danger." The waiter frowned, his grip tightening on her arm. "If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." Desperation boiled over. Ellie shoved past him, stumbling toward Charles's table. Heads turned, the buzz of conversation faltering as the diners noticed her intrusion. Charles looked up, confusion flashing across his face. "You can't eat that," Ellie shouted, her voice cracking. "It's poisoned." Gasps rippled through the room. Charles stood abruptly, his companions exchanging bewildered glances. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone firm but curious. "Your wife, she's trying to kill you." Ellie's words spilled out, wild and frantic. "I heard her talking in the alley. She's planning to poison you." Madeline, seated nearby, rose gracefully, her expression one of feigned horror. "Who is this girl?" she asked, her voice trembling with calculated concern. "Charles, this is ridiculous. She's lying." The crowd murmured, siding with Madeline. To them, Ellie was nothing more than a street urchin, a filthy outsider invading their pristine world. The whispers stung, but Ellie held her ground, her gaze locked on Charles. "You have to believe me," she pleaded. "Please don't eat it." Charles hesitated, his hand hovering over his plate. Madeline placed a hand on his arm, her voice soothing. "Charles, darling, don't let her ruin our evening. She's probably just looking for attention, or money." Ellie's stomach churned as the weight of their disdain bore down on her. But then Charles set his utensils down and stepped back from the table. His eyes, skeptical but sharp, studied her. "You said you overheard her?" he asked, his voice measured. Ellie nodded fervently. She was with a man outside. They were talking about poisoning you. Madeline's mask of concern cracked, her eyes narrowing. This is absurd. Charles, call security. Before Charles could respond, a commotion erupted as two waiters seized Ellie by the arms. Let me go, she yelled, struggling against their grip. You're making a mistake. She's lying to you. As Ellie was dragged away, she caught one last glimpse of Charles, his expression shadowed by doubt. The room buzzed with speculation as the doors slammed shut behind her. The frigid air bit at her cheeks as she stumbled into the street, her chest heaving with frustration. She had done all she could. Now it was up to him. The tension in the dining hall was palpable as Ellie's desperate words echoed across the room. Charles stood frozen, his eyes darting between Ellie and Madeline, whose polished facade was beginning to crack. Around them, murmurs grew louder, the guests craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the commotion. This is ridiculous. Madeline snapped, her voice sharp but controlled. Charles, look at her, she's clearly lying. Probably looking for a handout or trying to create some drama. Ellie twisted in the grip of the waiters, her voice hoarse from shouting. You have to believe me. She's trying to kill you. I overheard everything. The crowd's murmurs turned into laughter and scoffs. A woman at a nearby table whispered loudly to her companion, probably a junkie. Can't believe someone like that even got in here. Madeline stepped closer to Charles, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Darling, this is exactly the kind of chaos we don't need right now. Let the staff handle her. Charles frowned, his gaze still fixed on Ellie. There was something about her wild eyes and trembling voice that struck him. Not fear exactly, but urgency. It felt raw, real. He hesitated, ignoring Madeline's insistent grip. She doesn't seem like she's making this up, he murmured, half to himself. Madeline's face hardened for a fraction of a second before the mask of concern returned. Charles, don't be absurd. Do you honestly think I'd? She cut herself off, her voice catching just enough to convey hurt. You know I'd never harm you. Ellie thrashed against the waiters, pulling one arm free. She's lying, she yelled, her voice cutting through the whispers. I don't want your money. I don't want anything. Just don't eat the food. The whispers stopped, the room holding its collective breath. Charles turned to his plate, the once meticulously arranged meal now seeming ominous. The silver utensils gleamed under the chandeliers, untouched. His stomach churned, not from hunger but from doubt. Sir, should we call the authorities? One of the waiters asked, tightening his grip on Ellie's arm. Madeline's expression turned cold. Yes, call them. This is harassment. I won't have our evening ruined by a lunatic. Ellie stopped struggling, her body sagging in defeat. Her voice dropped, barely audible but cutting through the murmurs like a blade. You'll regret it if you don't listen. Charles's heart pounded. He had no reason to trust her. She was a stranger, disheveled and frantic, dragged into a world where she didn't belong. And yet, there was something about her words that clung to him, planting seeds of unease. Let her go, Charles said suddenly, his voice firm. The waiters hesitated, glancing at Madeline, whose face betrayed a flicker of panic before she masked it with an exasperated sigh. Charles, this is absurd. You're encouraging her. I said let her go, he repeated, sharper this time. Ellie stumbled forward as the waiters released her. For a moment she simply stood there, her chest heaving as if she couldn't believe she was free. She looked at Charles, her wide eyes filled with a strange mixture of gratitude and urgency. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. Please just don't eat it. Before anyone could stop her, Ellie darted for the door, weaving through the maze of polished tables and stunned diners. The maitre d' shouted after her, but she was already gone, vanishing into the cold night air. The room erupted into a cacophony of chatter. Guests speculated loudly, their voices a mix of amusement and disbelief. Charles sank back into his chair, his gaze fixed on the plate before him. His companions exchanged uneasy glances, but neither dared to speak. Madeline sighed dramatically, brushing non-existent lint from her sleeve. Charles, honestly, the things you let people get away with? She reached for his fork, nudging it toward him. You'll feel better. But Charles didn't move. The plate stared back at him, an unspoken challenge. His mind raced, replaying Ellie's words. She had nothing to gain. She hadn't asked for money, hadn't tried to manipulate him, only warned him. Maybe I've lost my appetite, he said finally, pushing the plate away. Madeline froze, her perfectly manicured nails tightening around the edge of her wineglass. Don't be ridiculous. You haven't eaten all day. Charles met her gaze, his eyes narrowing. I'll pass. The room seemed to shift, a subtle tension coiling tighter. Madeline hesitated, then plastered on a smile. "Suit yourself," she said lightly, but her fingers trembled as she reached for her drink. Later that night, Charles sat alone in his study, the uneaten meal discarded and forgotten. A faint headache throbbed at his temples, an unease gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. He swirled a glass of scotch, staring at the fireplace's flickering light. The memory of Ellie's voice refused to leave him. Every syllable carried weight, pressing against his chest. He didn't trust easily, but her warning felt different, urgent, almost desperate. With a sigh, he grabbed his phone. "Yes, Dr. Peterson," he said after the call connected. "I'd like to schedule a full examination. Tonight, if possible." As he hung up, Charles leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the city skyline. The night stretched endlessly before him, but one thought loomed larger than the rest. What if she was telling the truth? Charles's night had been restless, his mind plagued by the strange encounter with Ellie. Her warning played on a loop in his head, growing louder each time he tried to push it aside. By morning, he dismissed his unease as paranoia, or perhaps indigestion from the stress of the evening. But as the day progressed, Charles's condition worsened. A dull ache began to throb in his stomach, spreading until it felt like his insides were twisting. Sweat dampened his brow, and his vision blurred intermittently. By the time he slumped in his office chair, unable to focus on the financial report before him, the pain had become unbearable. "Mr. Lawson, are you all right?" his assistant asked, peeking into the room. Charles managed to wave her off weakly. "Just need a minute." But a minute wasn't enough. The world tilted as he tried to stand, his legs buckling beneath him. His assistant caught him just before he collapsed completely, her voice rising in panic. Moments later, paramedics were called. The hospital was a flurry of movement when Charles arrived, pale and barely conscious. Nurses and doctors surrounded him, speaking in hurried tones that blurred together in his ears. He caught fragments: toxicology, possible ingestion, and stabilize him, before darkness claimed him. When he woke, the harsh light of the hospital room made him squint. The antiseptic smell was overwhelming. A doctor stood at his bedside, clipboard in hand, his expression serious. "Mr. Lawson, you're lucky you came in when you did," the doctor began. "We've identified traces of a toxin in your system. It appears to have been ingested, likely through food or drink." Charles's chest tightened. Ellie's words thundered back with startling clarity: "Don't eat it. It's poisoned." How serious was it?" Charles managed, his voice hoarse. "Serious enough," the doctor replied. "We're running further tests to determine the exact substance, but you need to tell us everything you ate or drank in the last 24 hours. Charles's mouth went dry. He hesitated before speaking. "I didn't eat anything last night. I was about to, but something stopped me." The doctor nodded, jotting notes on his clipboard. "That may have saved your life. We'll need to keep you under observation for a while." As the doctor left, Charles closed his eyes, his mind racing. The warning wasn't a coincidence. Ellie's frantic words had been genuine. But what did it mean? Could Madeline, his wife of nearly a decade, really be capable of something so vile? The door to the room opened and Madeline entered, her designer heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Her makeup was flawless despite the early hour, her concern seemingly genuine as she rushed to his side. "Charles? My God, are you all right?" she exclaimed, gripping his hand tightly. Her touch felt colder than it should have. Charles forced a weak smile. "I'll live. The doctors are running tests." Madeline's brow furrowed, her voice trembling. "Tests? What kind of tests? Did they say what caused this?" "They think it was something I ate," Charles said, watching her reaction carefully. For a fraction of a second, her expression faltered, eyes widening, lips pressing into a thin line, but she quickly recovered. "That's horrible. Do you think it was the restaurant? We should sue them for negligence." Charles studied her, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and denial. He wanted to believe her concern was real, but Ellie's warning had lodged itself deep, refusing to let go. "I'll leave that to the doctors," he said evenly. "They'll figure it out." Madeline nodded, though her grip on his hand slackened slightly. "Of course. You just focus on getting better." Outside the hospital, Ellie lingered near the parking lot, her hood pulled low over her face. She had seen the ambulance arrive hours ago and had spent the night wandering the nearby streets, consumed by guilt. She should have done more, said more. What if Charles had eaten the food after all? What if her warning hadn't been enough? When she saw Madeline exiting the hospital, her chest tightened. The woman's expression, calm but tense, sent a chill down Ellie's spine. Something about the way Madeline held her phone, glancing around as if expecting to see someone, made Ellie certain of one thing. She wasn't as worried about Charles as she pretended to be. Ellie ducked behind a dumpster as Madeline passed, her heart pounding. She knew she had to act, but how? Who would believe a homeless girl with no proof against a woman like Madeline Lawson? Tears burned at the corners of her eyes as she clenched her fists. "I'll figure it out," she muttered to herself. "I have to." Back in the hospital room, Charles couldn't shake the lingering doubt gnawing at him. Madeline sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, her polished exterior unwavering. But the image of Ellie, her torn clothes, her desperate eyes, refused to leave his mind. "Madeline," he said suddenly, his voice sharper than he intended. She looked up, startled. "Yes." "Why didn't you eat last night?" he asked, watching her closely. Her eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place. "I wasn't hungry," she replied smoothly. "And after all the commotion, I lost my appetite." Charles nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear: Ellie had saved his life. Ellie stood across the street from the hospital, her nerves twisting in knots. She had spent hours pacing the sidewalk, watching the revolving doors slide open and shut as patients and visitors came and went. Each time she felt the urge to leave, to tell herself that her part in this story was over. But the weight of what she knew kept her rooted in place. "You already warned him," she thought, biting her lip. "What else can you do?" Yet deep down she knew she couldn't walk away. The look in Madeline's eyes the night before haunted her, a cold calculation that Ellie couldn't ignore. Charles was still in danger, whether he realized it or not. With a deep breath, Ellie tugged her hood over her messy hair and crossed the street. Her heart pounded as she slipped through the hospital's sliding doors, weaving past the bustling crowd. Security guards lingered near the entrance, but Ellie kept her head down, blending into the steady stream of visitors. The elevator ride felt endless as she scanned the directory she had stolen a glance at in the lobby. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, Ellie stepped into the quiet, sterile hallway, her sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. She scanned the doors, reading the names until she found the one she was looking for: Charles Lawson. Ellie hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "What if he doesn't believe me?" she thought. "What if he throws me out?" But the memory of Madeline's cold, venomous words pushed her forward. She turned the knob and slipped inside. Charles lay propped up on the hospital bed, his face pale but alert. The muted glow of the television cast flickering shadows across the room. He turned his head at the sound of the door, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion. "You," he said, his voice hoarse. "How did you get in here?" Ellie raised her hands defensively. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I need to talk to you." Charles's brow furrowed, his hand moving toward the call button. "You've already done enough. Security is going to. Your wife is trying to kill you," Ellie blurted, stepping closer. "I know how that sounds, but you need to hear me out." He froze, his finger hovering over the button. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the medical equipment. Finally, Charles let out a weary sigh and gestured toward the chair by his bed. "You've got 2 minutes," he said. "Start talking." Ellie sank into the chair, clutching her knees to stop them from trembling. "I was outside the restaurant last night," she began. "I was looking for food when I overheard your wife talking to a man in the alley. They were talking about poisoning you." Charles raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched across his face. "You just happened to overhear this?" "I swear I'm telling the truth," Ellie said, her voice rising. "She said you'd eat the food and never suspect a thing. That by the time anyone figured it out, it would be too late." Charles's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly did this man say?" Ellie hesitated, searching her memory for the exact words. "He told her it was dangerous, that she was playing with fire. She said she didn't care, that she was going to win." "Win what?" Charles asked, his tone sharp. "I don't know," Ellie admitted, her voice faltering. "But she sounded angry, desperate." Charles leaned back against the pillows, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. For the first time, Ellie noticed the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He wasn't as dismissive as he had been the night before, her words were reaching him. "You have to understand," Ellie continued. "I'm not doing this to mess with you or get something out of it. I couldn't stay quiet knowing what I heard." Charles studied her, his sharp eyes scanning her tattered hoodie, the smudges of dirt on her face. Everything about her screamed desperation, yet her words carried a conviction that was hard to ignore. Do you know who the man was? He asked after a long pause. No, Ellie said, shaking her head. But he seemed nervous. Like he didn't want to go through with it. Charles rubbed his temples, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in his mind. He thought of Madeline's reaction the night before, the brief flicker of something he couldn't place when he mentioned the doctor's tests. Could it all be a coincidence? Or had Ellie stumbled onto something far more dangerous than she realized? Why are you doing this? He asked suddenly, his voice softer. Ellie blinked, caught off guard by the question. Because I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you and I didn't say anything. Charles let out a bitter laugh. You think people like me are worth saving? Everyone's worth saving, Ellie shot back, surprising herself with the force of her words. Even if you don't think so. The sincerity in her voice hit Charles like a wave. He didn't trust easily. Years of navigating cutthroat business deals had taught him to be suspicious of everyone. Yet there was something about this girl, sitting before him with nothing to gain, that planted a seed of doubt in his carefully constructed world. All right, he said finally. I don't know if I believe you, but I'll look into it. Relief washed over Ellie's face. Thank you, she whispered. As she stood to leave, Charles called after her. If you're lying, I'll find out. I'm not, Ellie said, meeting his gaze. Just be careful. She slipped out of the room as quietly as she had entered, leaving Charles alone with his thoughts. The pieces were still scattered, but one thing was clear. Ellie believed every word she had said. And for the first time, Charles began to wonder if she was right. Charles sat at his desk, his office dimly lit except for the soft glow of his laptop screen. The events of the last 2 days replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain. Ellie's frantic warning, the strange inconsistencies in Madeline's behavior, and now the doctor's confirmation of poison. It all pointed to one horrifying possibility. For the first time in years, Charles felt completely unmoored. He leaned forward and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 2 rings, a gruff voice answered. Vincent Malone. Vincent, it's Charles Lawson. I need your help. The man on the other end let out a low chuckle. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind where my wife might be trying to kill me, Charles said bluntly. A brief pause, then a sharp inhale. I'm on my way. By the time Vincent arrived, the morning sun was creeping over the skyline. He stepped into Charles's office, his tailored trench coat damp from the early dew. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Charles. Start from the beginning, Vincent said, dropping his briefcase onto the desk. Charles recounted everything, the overheard conversation, Ellie's warning, and the poison confirmed by the hospital. Vincent listened intently, jotting notes in a worn leather notebook. So, you believe this girl? Vincent asked, his expression unreadable. I don't know, Charles admitted. But something's not right with Madeline. Vincent nodded. All right. If there's something to find, I'll find it. Meanwhile, Ellie navigated the back alleys of the city, her heart pounding. Ever since her visit to the hospital, she'd felt eyes on her. Twice now, she had spotted a dark sedan tailing her. The last time, a man had stepped out, his face obscured by the brim of his hat, forcing her to duck into a convenience store until he left. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Madeline had noticed her. Ellie's gut twisted with the realization that she had become a loose end, and Madeline wasn't the type to leave loose ends. Ellie ducked into a crowded coffee shop and sat in a corner, her hood pulled low over her face. As she sipped the hot coffee she had scraped together enough change to buy, her mind raced. She had done the right thing warning Charles, but now, it seemed her life was on the line. I have to find out more about her, Ellie thought. If I can figure out who that man was, maybe I can stop this. Back at Charles's penthouse, Vincent returned with his first findings. He dropped a stack of papers on the desk and crossed his arms. Your wife's been busy. Charles picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the contents. Bank statements, shell companies, and large, unexplained transfers all pointed to a web of deceit. What is this? He muttered. Your wife's been funneling money through offshore accounts, Vincent explained. Looks like she's been setting herself up for a clean getaway. And that's not all. I dug into her phone records. She's been in frequent contact with someone named Gregory Hale. Ring a bell? Charles frowned. No. Find out who he is, Charles said. His voice was sharp now, tinged with anger. He'd built his career on unraveling complicated deals, but nothing could have prepared him for this level of betrayal. That evening, Ellie's worst fears came true. She was making her way back to her makeshift shelter when she felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She glanced over her shoulder and saw 2 men in dark jackets trailing her. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Her pulse spiked. She quickened her pace, weaving through the alley she knew like the back of her hand. When she rounded a corner, one of the men called out, his voice low and threatening. "Ellie, we just want to talk." She didn't stop. She darted into a narrow passage between two buildings, her heart hammering as the men's footsteps echoed behind her. Just as she thought she'd lost them, she turned a corner and collided with someone. "Ellie?" The voice was familiar. She looked up to see Charles, his face a mix of surprise and concern. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked. "No time," Ellie panted, tugging at his arm. "We need to move." Charles glanced behind her and spotted the men closing in. Without hesitation, he grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a waiting car. "Get in," he ordered. The car sped off as soon as the doors closed, leaving the men behind in a cloud of exhaust. Ellie slumped against the seat, her chest heaving. "Care to explain what's going on?" Charles asked, his tone sharp. "They're after me," Ellie said. "I think your wife sent them." Charles's jaw tightened. "You're sure?" Ellie nodded. "I don't know how much she knows, but she knows enough." Charles ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Then we're both in danger," he muttered. "And I think I know who can help." Later that night, Vincent met with both Charles and Ellie in a nondescript office building. He listened as Ellie recounted her close call and filled in the gaps about the men chasing her. "Gregory Hale," Vincent said when Ellie described the man she overheard with Madeline. "That's the name that came up in her phone records." Ellie's eyes widened. "He was with her that night at the restaurant." Vincent nodded. "Then he's our link." Charles leaned forward, his expression grim. "What's our next move?" Vincent smirked. "We find Mr. Hale. And we make him talk." As the three of them plotted their next steps, Ellie felt a flicker of hope for the first time. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Together they might just uncover the truth, and survive long enough to see justice done. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. The annual charity gala was in full swing, a who's who of New York's elite mingling with champagne flutes in hand. Madeline Lawson moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her ruby-red gown drawing admiring glances as she exchanged pleasantries with donors and socialites. Charles stood near the entrance, his tuxedo impeccable, though his expression was anything but composed. He had come with one purpose, to confront Madeline. Ellie, who had insisted on coming, stood nearby in disguise. Her borrowed dress, simple yet elegant, allowed her to blend into the crowd. A strategically placed wig and glasses concealed her identity just enough to avoid drawing attention. "This is a mistake," Vincent had said earlier, his voice low as they reviewed the plan. "Madeline is sharp. If you don't have everything ready, she'll turn it against you." Charles clenched his fists, his resolve unshaken. "I'm ready." Ellie's voice cut through the memory. "There she is," she murmured, nodding toward Madeline, who was deep in conversation with a group of guests. Charles squared his shoulders and began moving through the crowd. Madeline's smile faltered when she saw Charles approaching. "Darling," she said smoothly, her tone laced with annoyance. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us tonight." "I wouldn't miss it," Charles replied, his voice calm but tight. "We need to talk. Now." Madeline's laugh was light but edged with steel. "Can't it wait? This is hardly the time or place." "It can't," Charles said, his eyes narrowing. "Let's step outside." The crowd around them fell silent, their gazes flicking between the couple. Madeline's cheeks flushed as she glanced at her audience. "You're making a scene," she hissed through gritted teeth. "What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" Charles shot back, his voice rising. "Maybe it's the fact that my wife has been plotting to kill me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, the hum of conversation halting abruptly. Madeline's expression shifted in an instant, from shock to hurt. She clasped her hands over her chest, her voice trembling. "Charles, what are you talking about? This is insane." Ellie watched from the edge of the room, her heart pounding. She had her phone hidden in her clutch, its camera recording every second. As the tension mounted, she edged closer, careful not to draw attention. Charles stepped closer to Madeline, his voice lowering but no less sharp. "I know about the poison, the offshore accounts, and Gregory Hale. I know everything, Madeline." Madeline's composure cracked for the briefest moment, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then just as quickly she recovered, tears brimming in her eyes. "Charles, listen to yourself," she said, her voice breaking. "You're paranoid. This is exactly what I've been worried about. You've been working too hard and it's affecting your mind." The crowd murmured in sympathy, shifting their attention to Charles with skeptical glances. Madeline's crocodile tears worked like a charm, and Charles felt the weight of their judgment. But he refused to back down. "Don't do this, Madeline," he said. "It's over." Madeline turned to the crowd, shaking her head. "This is my husband, everyone. The man I've stood by through thick and thin. And now he's accusing me of this." She choked back a sob. "I don't know what's happening to him, but I love him. I always have." Ellie clenched her teeth, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone tighter. Madeline's performance was brilliant, weaving a narrative that painted Charles as delusional. If Ellie didn't act soon, the truth would slip through their fingers. Then she saw it, Gregory Hale lurking near the edge of the ballroom, his expression dark as he scanned the scene. Ellie maneuvered through the crowd, her phone angled discreetly toward him. She caught him pulling a phone from his pocket and whispering into it. "It's falling apart," he muttered. "She's going to crack if this keeps up." Ellie's heart raced as she caught the exchange on video. The evidence she needed. As Charles and Madeline continued their tense standoff, Ellie slipped back to his side, nudging him subtly. He glanced at her and she gave the faintest nod. Taking a deep breath, Charles raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "Since my wife is so eager to defend herself, let's make sure we have all the facts," he said. He gestured toward Ellie, who stepped forward, phone in hand. "Ellie, play the video." Ellie's voice trembled slightly as she addressed the crowd. "This was recorded just moments ago." She hit play, and the room fell silent as Gregory Hale's voice filled the air, his words damning. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd as the video ended, and all eyes turned to Madeline. Her face had gone pale, her composure shattering in an instant. "That doesn't prove anything," she snapped, her voice shrill. "This girl, who even is she? She's probably lying to protect herself." Charles didn't flinch. "Vincent," he called, and the private investigator stepped forward from the shadows, holding up a folder. "We have bank records, travel logs, and phone records tying you and Gregory Hale to this entire scheme," Vincent said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "There's nowhere left to hide." Madeline's expression twisted, her polished exterior crumbling as she realized she was cornered. She glanced around the room, but the crowd had turned against her, their whispers venomous. Charles stepped closer, his voice cold. "It's over, Madeline." For the first time she had no response. As security escorted Madeline and Gregory Hale out of the gala, the room erupted into a frenzy of chatter. Ellie stood by Charles, her heart still pounding as the weight of the moment settled over her. "You did good," Charles said quietly, his voice heavy with gratitude. "So did you," Ellie replied, managing a small smile. The night wasn't over, but for the first time the tide had turned. The truth was out, and Madeline's carefully constructed facade was beginning to collapse. The night air was thick with tension as Charles paced his penthouse, his phone pressed to his ear. Vincent was on the other end, his voice grim. "She's not going quietly," Vincent said. "We intercepted another phone call. Madeline's hired someone to clean up the mess, and by clean up I mean take care of you and Ellie permanently." Charles's grip on the phone tightened. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Vincent replied. "She's desperate, and desperate people are unpredictable." Charles hung up, his mind racing. Ellie was safe for now, or so he thought. She had insisted on staying at a nearby motel to avoid drawing attention, but the decision now felt like a mistake. He grabbed his car keys and bolted for the door. Ellie stood in the dim motel room, her nerves fraying with each passing minute. She hadn't slept since the gala, her mind replaying Madeline's cold, calculated glare as security led her away. Ellie knew it wasn't over. People like Madeline didn't give up so easily. A sharp knock at the door startled her. "Who is it?" she called, inching toward the window. "Room service," a muffled voice replied. Ellie frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. Peering through the blinds, she froze. Two men in dark suits stood outside, their expressions cold and focused. Her breath hitched as she stepped back, frantically looking for a way out. Before she could react, the door burst open, the chain snapping like a twig. Ellie screamed, but the sound was muffled as one of the men clamped a hand over her mouth. They moved with precision, binding her hands and shoving her into a waiting van. The world blurred as the vehicle sped off into the night. Charles arrived at the motel minutes later, his heart sinking when he saw the splintered door hanging off its hinges. "Ellie," he shouted, rushing inside. The room was empty, the signs of a struggle painfully clear. A discarded chair lay on its side, and the faint scent of cheap cologne lingered in the air. Charles's phone buzzed, and he answered it without hesitation. "We have her," a gravelly voice said. If you want her back, you'll bring everything you've got on Madeline to the pier. Midnight. Come alone. The line went dead before Charles could respond. His blood ran cold, but his resolve hardened. He dialed Vincent, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at him. They've taken her, he said. The pier at midnight. I'm going. You can't go alone, Vincent warned. It's a trap. I don't have a choice, Charles replied. Just be ready to act if something goes wrong. The pier was shrouded in darkness when Charles arrived, the sound of waves crashing against the wooden beams the only noise. He carried a briefcase filled with fake documents, knowing full well the men wouldn't check its contents until it was too late. Two figures stepped out of the shadows, dragging Ellie between them. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with defiance. Where's the evidence? One of the men demanded, his grip tightening on Ellie's arm. Right here, Charles said, holding up the briefcase. Now let her go. The man smirked. We'll take the evidence first. Charles's jaw tightened as he set the briefcase on the ground and nudged it forward with his foot. One of the men bent to pick it up, but before he could open it, the air erupted with the sound of a gunshot. Chaos exploded as Vincent and a team of officers emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn. Drop it, Vincent barked. The men panicked, shoving Ellie aside as they scrambled for cover. Charles darted forward, grabbing Ellie and shielding her as gunfire echoed across the pier. Vincent's team moved with precision, cornering the men and disarming them in a matter of moments. Ellie clung to Charles, her breath ragged as he guided her toward the waiting squad cars. Are you okay? He asked, his voice urgent. Ellie nodded, her voice trembling. I am now. Back at the station, Vincent handed Charles a file, his expression grim but triumphant. We've got everything we need. Madeline's going down. Charles glanced at Ellie, who sat quietly in a nearby chair, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She looked exhausted but unbroken. You saved my life, Charles said, sitting beside her. Ellie gave him a faint smile. I think we're even. For the first time in years, Charles felt something he couldn't quite describe, gratitude mixed with something deeper. He had spent most of his life surrounded by wealth and power, but Ellie's courage and resilience had reminded him of something far more valuable, humanity. We're not done yet, Charles said, his voice firm. We're going to make sure Madeline pays for everything. Ellie nodded, her eyes steady. Together. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled with reporters, onlookers, and those eager to witness the downfall of Madeline Lawson. Cameras flashed as she was led in, her once pristine confidence replaced by a pale, hardened expression. Dressed in a tailored black suit, she looked more like a defendant in denial than a woman prepared to face justice. Charles sat near the front, his jaw tight as he avoided Madeline's glare. Ellie sat beside him, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Her simple outfit contrasted starkly with the polished appearances around her, but her steady resolve radiated strength. All rise, the bailiff announced as the judge entered, his robes sweeping behind him. The room stood, then sat in unison as the gavel struck. State versus Madeline Lawson, the judge intoned, his voice steady. The charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraudulent financial dealings. The prosecutor began, outlining the case with precision. The evidence Vincent had gathered was presented methodically: the offshore accounts, Gregory Hale's recorded phone calls, and the poison found in Charles's system. Piece by piece, the puzzle painted a damning picture of Madeline's greed and betrayal. Ellie's turn on the witness stand was tense. As she was sworn in, murmurs rippled through the courtroom, many doubting the credibility of the young woman whose background had been splashed across the tabloids. The defense attorney wasted no time exploiting her vulnerability. Miss Winters, the attorney began, his tone sharp, you're currently homeless, correct? Ellie's jaw tightened. Yes. And you've been arrested before? For loitering and petty theft. Yes, Ellie said again, her voice steady. But that has nothing to do with... Nothing to do with this case? The attorney interrupted, pacing dramatically. Your record suggests a history of dishonesty. How can we trust anything you say? Charles clenched his fists, anger rising as the attorney tried to discredit Ellie. But Ellie held her ground, her gaze unwavering. I know what I heard, she said firmly. I was there. I warned Charles Lawson before he ate the food that would have killed him. You can try to discredit me all you want, but the truth doesn't change. The defense attorney smirked, leaning closer. You expect this court to believe you over a respected member of society like Mrs. Lawson? Ellie straightened in her seat. I expect this court to believe the evidence." Her words hung in the air, echoing with conviction. The prosecutor stood to redirect, quickly presenting the video Ellie had recorded at the gala. The courtroom watched as Gregory Hale's voice confirmed the plot, the audio undeniable. Ellie's testimony, paired with the damning video, shifted the tide. The trial stretched over several days, but the outcome became increasingly clear. Gregory Hale, testifying under pressure from his own deal with the prosecution, corroborated Ellie's account. He admitted to aiding Madeleine in her scheme, detailing her plan to poison Charles and flee the country with his fortune. Madeleine's defense unraveled. Her attorney tried to cast doubt on her intentions, painting her as a woman overwhelmed by a failing marriage. But the evidence was overwhelming, her guilt inescapable. When Madeleine finally took the stand, her performance was icy and calculated. She denied everything, claiming she was being framed. Her tears, once so convincing, fell flat under the weight of the prosecution's evidence. As the final day of the trial arrived, Charles sat quietly, his thoughts racing. He reflected on how close Madeleine had come to getting away with it all. If not for Ellie, the system might have overlooked the truth. The courtroom had initially dismissed Ellie as an unreliable witness, her background used as a weapon against her credibility. It was only through sheer determination, and undeniable evidence, that the truth had come to light. Charles looked at Ellie, her presence a stark contrast to the room full of polished appearances. Her courage had turned the tide, her voice cutting through the prejudice that had nearly buried the case. Charles felt a deep sense of gratitude not just for her actions, but for the perspective she had brought to his life. The jury returned after hours of deliberation. The foreperson stood, the room holding its breath. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Madeleine Lawson, guilty. The gavel struck as gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge read the sentence, 25 years without parole. The weight of her actions finally bore down on Madeleine as she was led away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Charles exhaled, the tension in his chest releasing for the first time in weeks. He turned to Ellie, who met his gaze with a small, tired smile. "It's over," she said softly. "Because of you," Charles replied. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their questions a cacophony of chaos. Charles ignored them, guiding Ellie through the crowd with a protective hand on her shoulder. For once, the flashing cameras didn't feel like an intrusion. They were a reminder that justice had prevailed. As they reached the quiet of his car, Charles turned to Ellie. "Thank you. For everything." Ellie shrugged, her humility as disarming as ever. "You believed in me when no one else would. I couldn't let you down." Charles smiled, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't felt in years. "You didn't. You saved me." And in that moment, Charles realized Ellie hadn't just saved his life, she had changed it. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Charles's office, illuminating the rows of folders and blueprints scattered across his desk. For the first time in years, the documents weren't business proposals or stock reports. They were plans for something far more meaningful, a foundation dedicated to helping the city's homeless and underprivileged. Charles leaned back in his chair, surveying the work ahead. His name carried weight and his wealth was vast, tools he intended to wield for change. But the driving force behind this transformation wasn't his fortune. It was the young woman sitting across from him, her gaze sharp and determined. Ellie glanced up from a stack of brochures, her lips curving into a faint smile. "This could actually work," she said, holding up a draft of the Foundation's mission statement. "From survival to success." "I like it." Charles nodded. "It's more than just a name. It's what I want to see happen. For you, for others like you." Ellie's smile widened, though a shadow of disbelief lingered in her eyes. "It's still strange," she admitted. "A month ago I was eating out of dumpsters. Now I'm sitting in this," she gestured around the opulent office, "like I belong here." "You do belong here," Charles said firmly. "You've proven that 100 times over." Ellie looked away, her cheeks flushing. Despite everything she had done, the compliment still felt foreign. "I just did what anyone else would have done." Charles laughed softly, shaking his head. "No, Ellie. Most people wouldn't have risked their lives for a stranger. You did." The foundation launched 3 months later with a ribbon-cutting ceremony at its new downtown headquarters. The event was modest by design, a stark contrast to the flashy galas Charles had once attended. Instead of wealthy donors, the crowd was filled with people from all walks of life: shelter residents, community leaders, and those the foundation aimed to help. Ellie stood beside Charles as he addressed the crowd, her nerves buzzing. Public speaking wasn't something she ever imagined doing, But this wasn't about her, it was about them. She took a deep breath as Charles handed her the microphone. "I'm not used to talking to so many people," Ellie began, her voice shaky but steadying with each word. "But I know what it's like to feel invisible. To think no one cares. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. People care. I care." She paused, glancing at Charles, who gave her an encouraging nod. "This foundation isn't just about giving people a roof or a meal. It's about giving them a chance. Because everyone deserves one." The crowd erupted into applause, but Ellie barely noticed. Her heart was pounding too loudly, a mixture of pride and disbelief washing over her. Over the months, the foundation grew beyond what either of them had imagined. Shelters were built, job training programs launched, and legal services provided to those who had none. Ellie threw herself into the work, using her story to connect with others in need. Charles watched her transformation with admiration. The streetwise, guarded young woman who had once shouted a warning across a dining hall was now a leader, inspiring change with every word and action. One evening, as they reviewed the Foundation's latest progress report, Charles leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You've become the face of this place, you know?" Ellie snorted. "Hardly. That's still you." "I don't think so," Charles said, his tone light but sincere. "People see you, Ellie. They listen because you've been where they are. You're proof that things can get better." Ellie's expression softened. "Maybe. But I couldn't have done any of this without you." Charles shook his head. "I didn't save you. You saved yourself. And you saved me in the process." Ellie's lips curved into a smile, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket. "Guess we saved each other." The story closed on a quiet note, the two of them standing side by side on the rooftop of the Foundation's headquarters. The city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling against the dark sky. "What's next?" Ellie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and hope. Charles folded his arms, staring out at the horizon. "More of this. Helping people, making a difference." Ellie nodded. "I can live with that." For the first time in years, Charles felt at peace. His world, once filled with superficial success, now felt full, real. And it was all because of a chance encounter with a street girl who had refused to stay silent. They stood in silence, their shared journey reflected in the city's sprawling lights. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were ready to face it together.